I think my life always needs a soundtrack. That's really nice, you know? We'll work on that. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. You know, it'd be ironic today is if I only had like 5 minutes that I actually had to talk. Like my whole message. I've got lots of time. That's wonderful. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, maybe I should shorten it, just to keep you guys guessing. How's everybody doing? Very good. So many things to talk about. Well, we're in the Lord's Prayer, so, that's a good place to anchor what we're going to talk about. It's, one of the, I'm going to get to the phrase that we're on today, this Sunday, is Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Amen, exactly. And so I'm going to get to there, but it's going to take me a little bit of time, okay? So bear with me. Because this is a pretty important phrase, right? And there's kind of three highlights I want to give in that. And I want to talk about something else first. A number of years ago, you guys know I grew up in California, right? If you didn't, then you've been informed. I am American, so I'm Canadian enough to apologize for being American at this point. So I'm sorry. That gets a laugh from all the Canadians, always. My American friends don't understand it, though. Yeah. I remember a number of years ago when I still lived in California, my dad served on the board of like an ecology recovery, green nonprofit. And one of the things this nonprofit did is they worked with various gas and electric companies, and they would take teams to the Sequoia National Forest up in the mountains, or they'd take them to Yosemite, and they'd go to clean underbrush in these massive forests and to take care of the environment, right? So they take volunteers, they take company volunteers, that kind of stuff. And since my dad was on the board, I was privy to go to a couple of the retreats and stay in these places and go help. You get a peek behind the scenes what they're doing to preserve and take care of the forests. And so when I grew up in California is known for forest fires now, right? When I grew up, we didn't have that kind of, we still had forest fires, but not like 800 in a single year, that kind of stuff happens now. And a lot of that has to do with the different ways that they manage forests now versus how they did when I was growing up. They cleared out a lot of the underbrush, and the underbrush was what would catch fire and lead to large forest fires. And it's a delicate balance in the ecosystem of the forest. There's my wife was reminding me about this a number of years ago in Yosemite, which if you've never been to Yosemite, you should probably go. It's absolutely stunning. But a number of years ago in Yosemite, the wolves had been hunted to extinction in that part of California. And what happened was the elk and the deer and these sort of large, large animals had no apex predator. And so they just started flourishing, which on the outset looks good, right? You've got animals growing, thriving, but over time you had these massive herds that would move through open fields, they'd overgraze, and it started impacting the rest of the animals. There was too many elk, and there was too many deer. And there's a documentary about this. You can find it. I think it's on Netflix. I'm not sure what it's called. My wife loves watching that stuff, so I'm sure she's watched that one. And so what they ended up doing is they reintroduced wolves, a pack of wolves, a small pack of wolves, into Yosemite, tagged them, marked them, followed them. And within weeks, it had already shifted the whole environment. Because now all of the herds, they couldn't hang out in large groups because they're just waiting to be attacked by the wolves if they hang out in large groups. So they had to form small little, the giant herds move into smaller herds. They can't overgraze in the places. They can't move through in large numbers. They've got to work to preserve themselves now. So just by reintroducing one environmental factor began to shift the whole ecosystem of the forest right back to a place of health again. It's really fascinating stuff. What does it have to do with the Lord's Prayer? Well, we're getting there. Maybe I just like talking about Yosemite. We went camping there many times when I was growing up. I saw many black bears and brown bears, that kind of stuff. Another point in that vein. You guys know, I've spoken about this a number of times. There's a monastery down in Nova Scotia I like going to visit. I have some monk friends down there. And I like going there about once a year to get away for 3 days, 3 or 4 days, 2 or 3 days, just to seek the Father in silence and solitude. And last year, I went with one of my good friends. We decided we'd do a 3-day trip down to Nova Scotia. It's in New Germany. And one of the ways this monastery supports what they do is they sell garden boxes. So, monks are always supposed to be good with their hands, and these guys put most of us to shame when they are growing large gardens, this kind of stuff, and they sell them all over, travel to Halifax and sell them, and some fantastic stuff, right? So we get there, my friend and I, we get there, and I'm looking forward to 3 days of sitting in the chapel, time in silence with the Father, discerning his will, what he's doing, what he's speaking to me about, all this kind of stuff, right? Like you would go to a monastery for. And the first thing, one of the, Father Jean-Baptiste is his name, he's an Orthodox guy, and he's my age, and his beard is bigger than mine is, but he's a monk, so it's a lot messier. And Father Jean-Baptiste always has dirty hands because he's working in the garden. You can always see it. And so he asks my friend and I, if you would like, you can spend your time just in prayer. That's fine with us. But if you want some things to do, we can put you to work as well. And before I could say, no, that's okay, my friend said, we would love to do that. And you're not supposed to curse people in Christianity, but there's been moments where I've been close, That was one of them. And so Father Jean-Baptiste takes us down to the garden rows and indicates a particular row, which is probably about 40 or 50 feet long, and says, you guys can weed this. Here's some gloves. Get down on your hands and knees and do it. And these are the plants to look for, and these are the weeds to look for. And when we got down there, my friend, he turned to me as we started out, and he said, "Oh, Josh, I know you could just sit here for 3 days in silence, but I can't do that." So I had to volunteer us to do this. It's like, So anyway, we spent the next 3 or 4 hours working through the whole thing. We had a great conversation. It was actually a wonderful time. I forgave him a couple months later. But we had worked through, the little weeds, big weeds. You're working through this whole thing. You're trying to create an environment. It's much the same as what we were doing in Yosemite and Sequoia National Forest. We're trying to create an environment that's conducive to growth, right? Because the weeds are going to choke out the growth. So we have to remove the weeds in order for the plants to flourish, because the weeds are going to keep the vegetables from growing. They'll overtake the whole thing. And they had the first time I went there, they just had a bunch of rows laid out. But the year that I went last year, they had built polytunnels up and down each one of the rows. And, I thought, well, I don't know a whole lot about gardening. The one time I tried to start a garden in our backyard, it failed miserably. I put it in the shadows. That wasn't all that smart. It did not have the environmental factors to produce growth. And so Father Jean-Baptiste told me that the reason why they put these polytunnels up was because they could grow for much longer in the year. Right through the winter, there were things that they could grow there. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize that just changing one factor, putting these polytunnels are plastic things, by the way, that cover the whole, if you don't know what that is. I learned what it was this morning, so what the name was. So now that the environmental factor has changed, growth can happen year-round with certain plants. Well, that was fascinating. You adjust the ecosystem just a little bit, right? One factor is removed in Yosemite, the wolves, and it creates devastation for the rest over time. At the monastery, one factor is added, and it preserves growth, and organic growth happens much more rapidly, longer periods of time, and they can sustain it. One factor. It's a really interesting thing. So it'd be funny if we're going to end with communion today if I just ended on that note. Here's your talk on gardening. So a garden has an ecosystem, a forest has an ecosystem, right? Many of you remember when Hurricane Fiona came in, and like the Teapot Rock down at what's the beach? Thunder Cove is gone, right? The ecosystem shifted with one major storm. The dunes were radically impacted. The ecosystem shifted because of one storm. Environmental factors shift the ecosystem. There's multiple things that can impact an ecosystem. And here's the point I want to drive home today, is the kingdom has an ecosystem. The kingdom has an ecology. So things like, we're a church. I was thinking about this. We're a church, and because we're a church, we need to have home groups. Right? Home groups, you guys, that's good. Home groups are a good thing, right? We just had this a couple weeks ago, right? And the announcement of these are all the home groups we're going to be having. All the life groups, the connect groups, whatever word that we want to use to describe them, right? In the ecology of the kingdom, it's not right for a church to have home groups. In the ecology of the kingdom, relationships matter. Right? Actually, an ecosystem is defined by how living organisms interrelate with one another in the environment. In the ecosystem of the kingdom, it's important that the living organisms learn how to live and coexist. So when we look at the kingdom, we go in the king, and Jesus describes us all throughout, right? Like the primary text I'm looking at when it comes to the Lord's Prayer is the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6. The Sermon on the Mount I've talked about the Sermon on the Mount at length with you guys, right? The Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' vision of the kingdom. It's his vision, let's use this language today, it's his vision of what the ecosystem of the kingdom is like. And it's full of examples of how we relate one to another. Right. Someone says something hurtful to you, turn the other cheek. Someone tries to take one of your things, right? They covet your stuff, just give it to them. Right? He describes what it's going to look like in the kingdom, what the ecosystem is going to look like when living organisms relate to each other. So as a church, we don't go, well, because we're a church, we have to have home groups and life groups and connect groups. In the church, we go, we're part of the kingdom, and a value of the ecosystem of the kingdom is that people learn to relate to one another in humble and tender ways. So how are we going to facilitate that happening? We develop, and we're not developing the ecosystem, but we're recognizing the telltale signs of when an ecosystem is thriving. And one of the telltale signs is that relationships thrive and they deepen and love flourishes. So we can approach it as a community and go, well, we're a church, so we're supposed to have this thing. Or we can approach it as kingdom people and say, what is the ecology of the kingdom like? How do we thrive in our relationships? Well, one way we can do that is we set up time to have meals together. You see, one looks at the function of a thing, one looks at the purpose of the kingdom. This is what the kingdom's like. So how are we going to thrive as a community? Well, let's set time aside to have a meal together and talk about life. Now we're working within the ecology of the kingdom. You understand what I'm talking about? Does this make sense? Well, so here's I love that this happened this morning. Here's a major point about the ecosystem of the kingdom. You know what's not part of the ecosystem of the kingdom? Sunday morning's lights. They're not. But we put so much importance on what a gathering looks like when we approach it as a functional display, or we approach it as a functional time together, when we approach it that way, when we approach it as, well, we need to have a good program so that people are attracted, so that people come, so that people tithe, and so people stay. When that's our approach, we're so far removed from the ecosystem of the kingdom because now we're in the ecosystem of the world. Let's get people to come, right? Let's say Eddie is one of the most successful car salesmen here on PEI, right? There's an ecosystem that works within the car sales business that attracts people there. That's wonderful. That's great. That's awesome for Township. That's not how the kingdom operates. We even go and we talk about having an attractional model of church. Let's try and attract as many people as we can. Right? And it's a small thing, but the lights are part of that. All of a sudden we're thrown. We go, oh no, what do? It doesn't look right. Right? Because we've developed in our hearts an ecosystem that's not what Jesus lays out in the Sermon on the Mount and in the Lord's Prayer. Here's one of the things that we've been talking about, my friends and I, is we have to develop and recognize an above-the-line mindset. Paul says this, right, in Colossians, I think it's Colossians 2. Set your affection or set your mind on things above. What we do is we try and put things above and then set our mind on them. So we put our ministry, we put our job, we put our title. We can drive it home a little bit more on PEI. We put our family name above the line. We shove those things up there and set our mind on them and expect to have peace in this life. But we've set our affection on things that are not above the line and then put them above the line. What's above the line is the Father. The Father's above the line. Your call to Him in intimacy as a son or a daughter is above the line. It's interesting. I'll say that in a second. I'm getting to the Lord's Prayer, I promise you. Okay? It's just important to lay some things out before we get to that point. What's below the line is your assignment. What's above the line is your call as a son or a daughter. Okay, your assignment can be to work in a particular field. That's not your call. Your assignment can be to pastor in a particular place. Your assignment can be to be an elder in a particular community. Your assignment can be to lead a home group. Your assignment can be, as Scott so lovingly talked about, Celebrate Recovery. That's an assignment, that's not a call. The call is not to lead Celebrate Recovery. The assignment is to lead Celebrate Recovery. The call is unto the Father, And Scott, as a pastoral father figure, called by God to be that, is assigned to lead a ministry. But what happens is we put the assignment above the line, derive our identity, value, and purpose from the assignment rather than the call. And now when the assignment shifts, we either crash or we defend it with our lives. So we set up walls so that we won't let other people in and define what it looks like. And it can only look this way. And as soon as we're challenged, we get angry, and now our relationships crumble, and we're back in this ecosystem over here. You understand that? Above the line mindset. God, my call to him as a son or a daughter, and how that's expressed, and my family. Those are the only things above the line. Everything else is below the line. I derive my identity, my value, and my purpose because I can say, our Father. He's above the line. And because he's above the line, I want to live above the line. But notice that Jesus, when he says many are called but few are chosen, I was thinking about this in the last couple of weeks as some of my friends, we've been talking about this, that when Jesus says many are called but few are chosen, he doesn't say many are called into prophetic ministry but few are chosen. He doesn't say many are called into the business world but few are chosen. He doesn't say many are called as apostles but few are chosen. Because he doesn't identify the call with the function, he identifies the call with the intimate relationship. But when we think about a call, we think about the function. We don't think about the relationship I now have with him. Many are called to intimacy with the Father, but few respond to the call. That's what he's saying. Not many are called to a vocational thing. That's an assignment. As soon as we think the call is the assignment, we've lost sight of the vision, which is his loveliness. That's when we've talked about this many times. That's what transforms a people, a person. So we don't live from the outside in, we live from the inside out. And in fact, the Lord's Prayer in its entirety helps to define an ecosystem of the kingdom. And the first phrase is vitally important, our Father. Notice Jesus doesn't say my Father. He doesn't say your Father. He doesn't say the Father. He says our Father. So the name, and then, we'll get into this, but then hallowed be your name. Right? Then what's the name, right? The name is Father. That's the name he's just referred to him as. The Old Testament refers to God as Father very sparingly. It does, but it's very sparing. And it's usually, he's the Father. It's in relationship to all of creation, right? He fathered creation, and so he's a father, right? That's more of a generic or general sense. Or he's the father of Israel. Or he's the father of Abraham, and somehow because he's the father of Abraham, we've derived identity and value from that in the Old Testament. When Jesus comes in and begins talking about the Father, defining the ecosystem, he doesn't say the guy who created everything, we can kind of think of him as the white-bearded guy in the sky who's kind of obtuse but generally loving and kind, but you don't really get to know him at all. But he talks about him in dear, intimate terms. And talks about him in a way that's knowable. That's what the whole incarnation is about, is telling us what the Father's like. You can't know him. Right? Paul says this. He dwells in unapproachable light. You can't know him. So what happened? God goes, all right, I'll come. And I'll show you what I'm like. So when he says our Father, he's defining something deep and intentional. God's not an abstract figure that you can think of as let's go to Greek philosophy, the prime cause. Right? That's the kind of way the Old Testament thinks of God as Father, the prime cause of creation. That's not how Jesus communicated what he's like. He says, our Father, and then he gives him a location. But that's an interesting one too. The ecosystem of the kingdom, the ecology of the kingdom, begins and ends with a personal encounter. You know, it's interesting when Jesus says, when you pray, right? He starts the whole teaching on the Lord's Prayer off about 5 verses earlier, and he says, when you pray. He says, when you pray, enter into, depending on the translation that you're looking at, enter into your innermost chamber. Enter into your secret room. Right, the word that's used talks about the room that's hidden deep in the house. Enter into your innermost house, innermost room. And there, the Father who is in secret will see in secret. So when he starts the whole thing off, giving we've turned the Lord's Prayer into a format. I'll say this thing and this thing and this thing. But he starts the whole thing off. When you pray, enter into the place where the Father is, and he'll see you and be with you. So he starts the whole thing off. The kingdom is based on encounter. There's no other way around it. So I think we live in a modern age where you can be a Christian without knowing what God is like. That's crazy. That's so foreign to the Gospels, to the Bible, and to the early Christians. The early Christians were Christians because they knew exactly what God was like. He came and revealed himself to them. And then Jesus tells us right here, he's going to continue revealing himself to you. The kingdom begins and ends with our Father. You could stop right there and get no further and be radically moved and impacted. Our Father. Because he's inviting them. So this means, think about this. This means, and we'll dive into this a little bit more. This means that he's basically saying to them, what you've seen and heard in me, in my relationship to the Father, is also your relationship to the Father. Because he's our Father, not my Father. He's our Father. So how you've seen me relate to him is how you can also relate to him. Where he says in the end of the book of John, right before he goes, he's resurrected, he's talking to Mary in the garden, and he says, I go to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Something has fundamentally shifted in the incarnation in how we relate to the Father, because he's no longer the Father, a Father, your Father, Abraham's Father, he's my Father. And in being my Father, he longs to reveal the personal nature of what he's like. And so when we pray, we enter into the secret place because life is lived from the inside out, not the outside in. It doesn't matter if the lights don't work. Because what's more important is that the people in this room are encountering the Father. And if the lights mean that you can't encounter the Father, the problem isn't the lights. The Our Father is what guides our life. Like this morning, I was sitting on my couch. I got some new noise-canceling headphones. It's wonderful. They're in the ear. They plug your ear, and then you can push the button on the headphone, and it turns on, and then all of a sudden you don't hear the kids anymore. I've entered into the inner chamber. Beep, there it is. So I was sitting on the couch, just listening to some worship music, thinking about this morning, spending time with the Father, and I'm watching my son, our youngest son, Cassian, and he's playing on the table, and he's got acorns that he's collected from a school project, and I'm sure he's making a lot of noise, but I can't hear it. And he's smiling and he's laughing. He's got the Yahtzee game opened with the dice container to roll the dice around, and he's got all the acorns in the dice container, and he's rolling it all over the place. I'm happy, I can't hear it. He's happy. And I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, as a father, we've created an environment for him to thrive. And I don't care what he does, right? What matters to me as a father is that he's enjoying his life. So I'm thinking about this, the conversation this morning, I'm thinking about it, I'm going, our family is an ecosystem designed to help our kids thrive and grow. And I'm not trying, and see, here's the thing. What happens in church, ministry, and leadership is we don't see growth, so we try and control the environmental factors. And we create a stale environment that doesn't produce growth, so then we try and control even more. And my son doesn't grow because I tell him, stop using the Yahtzee thing like that. It's for the dice, not the acorns. He's expressing himself and he's exploring, and it's a beautiful, wonderful thing that brings great pleasure to me because I've created the environment for him to grow. And I can just watch and go, oh, that's wonderful. I love that. It brings my heart pleasure. And we sit down here, like thinking about our relationship to God, we sit down here and we go, oh, God, what's your will for my life? Am I doing the right thing? I think I missed it here, 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 and here, and here. And I'm going to miss it all these other ways. And I'm such a horrible, evil, awful person. And all of a sudden, life becomes all about me. And it's not about our Father. Now he's your Father. Because when he's my Father, when he's our Father, my life is focused on what he's like, not my failures, not my shortcomings, not the examples that I can give you a myriad of ones where I'm not acting like him and Jesus and everything. But if I focus on those things, I've made myself the central figure. And I'm the story. And now my life is telling my story, not his story. When he's the central figure and everything relates to him, then I go, like I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and he's getting invited on this missions trip. But he's struggling with some of the dynamics at home, and he's going, well, I got to go on this missions trip, and my wife is frustrated, and these pressures are happening, and all this. And I was like, well, why would you go on the missions trip? Well, it's the great opportunity. And I'm like, well, the missions trip will be here in a year. Like, it's fine. But we get so caught up on the thing that's happening in front of us, and that goes above the line, and now that thing's going to make this awesome ministry experience. And the whole while, all the other people are suffering who are in your life because now you've decided to derive identity value from that. And so I was saying to him, he's like, aren't you afraid that if you say no, you'll miss some great thing God's going to do? And I went, no, I'm actually not. I said, I believe that in my bumbling efforts to follow him, that he's going to, I read this recently, it's a straight and narrow path, right? We know that. You know how hard it is to get lost on a straight path? You have to take yourself off the path willfully. It might be hard, but it's not hard to get lost on a straight path. I believe that in my endeavors to follow him, making him central to my life, I'm not going to miss the thing that he does, even if I'm unaware of how he gets me there. But because I'm entrusting myself to him, which is really what the word faith means, to trust yourself to something, because I'm entrusting myself to him, even if I get it wrong, he's already made calculations for that. Because he's our Father. And he's central to my life. And so even if I'm not aware that he's leading me, I know that he's leading me. Jesus lays all this out in one phrase, our Father. But then he hammers the point home when he says, who is in heaven? How does that hammer the point home? Because that seems like he's in a location that we're not, right? If he's in heaven, but we're not in heaven. And so sometimes, we're like, well, okay, we're seated in heavenly places, and so we're with him, and we're living from heaven to earth, and And all, we invent all these like fancy ways of thinking to try and convince ourselves that we're with him. Rather than just going, well, okay, Jesus says he's with us. So we've got these theological hoops we jump through. Right? We take verses out of context, all that stuff. Now that's a conversation for another day. But here's what I want to say with that. Our Father in heaven. Well, so he's given you a location, right? He's in heaven. But he's also already given you a location. Let the Bible interpret the Bible. Right? He's already given you a location. Verse 6, when you pray, chapter 6, Matthew 6, chapter 6, verse 6. When you pray, go into your room, and when you've shut your door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. So he just told you where he's located. In your room. Where you are. Go into your secret room, and your Father who's in secret will see you. Our Father who is in heaven, I think Jesus was being a bit cheeky right here. Because he's just said your Father's in your room and he's going to see you there. Like no Jew thought that. God was in the temple. And you maybe get to visit there once a year, a couple times a year when there's a feast, and hopefully the priest will say a blessing over you. He's not in your room. He's somewhere else. So what Jesus is saying here is he's made his home in your heart. He's in your home. He's in your innermost chamber. He exists as the God of all creation, which the Jew was perfectly fine saying, but he also exists in the prayer room of your house, in the innermost chamber. This doesn't obviously mean a room in your house. It means a room in your heart. He's here. You don't need to go anywhere to get him. He's here. He's right in this guy. Actually, do you know the word in the Hebrew for heart? Is the picture of a shepherd's staff and a tent. And it means the rod inside. I'm going to make a point with that. There was only one other place in Hebrew custom where there was a shepherd's staff inside of a tent that had led. That's the tabernacle. You had Aaron's staff that budded set inside the tent that had led the people. Right? You guys know, you're following with me with that, right? The whole idea of the staff in the tent that led is that God dwelt in the tent, and the priest goes into the tent to commune with God and come back to the people. So when Jesus says, go into your innermost chamber, go into your secret place, go into your room, he's got this whole thing in mind. God sat on a throne in the tabernacle. It was called the mercy seat. And the priest came in and then helped the people. And he's going, hey, you know all of that stuff there? That all is in here now. He's not out there, he's in here. The ecosystem of the kingdom is that the Father resides in your heart. And that he longs to encounter you there. He's not distant. Even when you don't know you're being led, you're being led. Even when you don't know he's there, he's there. It's not, in some sense, we enact prayerful rhythms to become aware of his presence, but it's not like we invoke his presence. We become aware of what he's already doing. There's something about sitting in silence and solitude that convinces you slowly over time that there's another thing there with you. Like once I quiet, I sit and I'm aware that there's another presence with me. So we think we got to jump through hoops for him to be here. Worship has to be done so well, the chairs have to be set up a certain way, the lights have to work. No. He's just happy that you're here. Not what it looks like. Our Father in heaven. Our Father. You may think he's in there, but he's also in here. We don't got to invent theological trappings to try and figure out how we're living there. Because, heaven's not the destination. But the Revelation 21 and 22 end with earth being reformed. That's the occupation, earth. You're going to be sorely disappointed if you think, well, I'm going to get to spend eternity in heaven. It's like, no. Actually, I'm going to remake earth. That's how it ends. He doesn't want to get you there. He wants to get him here. That's the point. He's not trying to get you out of this world. He's trying to get himself into it through you. Our Father, who is in heaven, is in the secret place in your heart, and then openly what he does in you will be seen. Do you get that? He wants to be in your heart, seen in your actions, not in heaven, a distant reality. Our Father. The ecology revolves around him being central in your life. That's not a thing that you plan for. It's a thing he reveals. I've said this a million times to you, that transformation begins with, is sustained by, and ends in catching a glimpse of his beauty. By that, we're undone. Every one of you is here because on some level he revealed himself to you. Whether it was a microcosm of a moment that arrested your attention, or whether it's a whole lifetime of encounters, it's somewhere in there. Some of you are going, well, I've lost sight of that. I haven't seen that in so long. And it's like that doesn't devalue who you are as a person, because the Father still loves you. But now let's talk about getting back to that place of living in encounter. Revisit those moments where he revealed himself to you. Thank God for those moments. Recall those moments where you recognized our Father in an intimate and tender way. Or sometimes it's just about remembering. It's pretty easy for me to get fond of my wife when I'm away just by thinking of her. It's not like when I'm away, I start thinking about all the things that I don't like. I remember her fondly, and so I desire her embrace. Just get right back. You go, I lost sight of that. It's not happening for me. Maybe he revealed himself, but I don't live this way, and it's not a lifestyle for me. That's fine. Just think about God. When he says, do this in remembrance of me, which we're about to do, he doesn't, there's not a bunch of stuff you have to jump through. He just says, remember me. Right? Set your thinking on me. Memory is a powerful thing, man. Thinking about, how many of you ever thought about a memory and either been depressed or happy? It's a powerful thing that we don't consider the effect. Think back. Like Revelation, he says, return to your first love. Think back to what that was like. I don't know if I see him as my Father. That's okay, he is. But there's a moment, you're here because there's a moment he arrested you. There's a moment you caught a glimpse. As small or as big as that would be, revisit that moment. That's all prayer really is. Enter into the secret place and recognize that the Father is there. That's basically what Jesus is saying here. When you go into the secret place, Like when you pray, go into the secret place, the Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. Then he says, when you pray, say it this way. So when you go into the secret place to pray, say, our Father. When you go into the secret place, say, my Father. You can say my Father. He's talking to a bunch of people. So when you go there, you can say my Father. And it's not about the words, it's about the intention. I'm going in, recognizing the reality of who he is, that he's here. And the longer I sit, the more I recognize he's here. Because he just wants to create an environment for you to thrive and grow. And there's lots to say about that, like it's interesting that with the analogy with Yosemite, you introduce a difficult circumstance, the apex predator, and all of a sudden the ecosystem thrives. Difficulty is not necessarily a thing to be shunned. Sometimes it's the very thing you need to snap you out of your everyday normal. That doesn't mean he's not our Father. And I'm not saying that he's introducing a predator into your situation. Please hear me when I say that. So there's difficult things that we go through, and we go, well, where's God in the midst of that? And that's not the question. The question is, can I find him in the midst of it? Not did he do that, it's can I find him in the midst of it? Can I reorient my life back to him? Can I find him again? Because he's there to be found. The simple, our Father, he's in my heart, he's in the secret place. Let me retreat back to that. Because everything else flows from there. Without that as a core pillar, I'm tired. Without that as a core pillar, the ecology gets all off. It has to be centered around him. Then everything, I guess I'll say one last thing. Maybe the worship team can come up. I was doing some reading on ecosystems today, that ecosystem thrives when the nutrients can come from the environment into the living organism. When there's a blockage in that, whether it's through human intervention, whether it's through natural disasters, whether it's through weather patterns, when there's a blockage in that, then the ecosystem can suffer. But the whole point of the ecosystem is getting the nutrients from the environment into the living organism. And the more resilient the ecosystem is, the healthier the organisms can be. The whole point is getting life and nutrients into the organism. And like I said, that begins with our Father. He dwells in the secret place. And the other thing is, when it says, hallowed be your name, holy is your name. You're not changing the nature of his name by saying that, but you're recognizing something distinct about who he is. The word hallowed, or based on the word holy, in the Old Testament is the Hebrew word kodesh. And what it means is to be set apart as distinct and separate. Things are only holy or made holy because they're a reflection of who God is. God alone is holy. So you sanctify the temple or the tabernacle or the instruments or the people, the priests. You set them apart as a witness to his holiness. Okay, so when we say holy is his name, and holy is his name as Father, what we're saying is this, and hear this, okay? Because some of you had good fathers and some of you had bad fathers. We've talked about this. When you say his name as Father is set apart and different, you're saying he's not like any other. Okay, you may have seen shades of what he's like in a good father. You may have seen shades of what he's not like in a bad father. But he's not like either one. He's so much more than that. He is separate. He is other than. He is distinct from any other image you've ever seen. The only image that defines him is Christ. And what we see in the person of Jesus is this tender, affectionate, loving, merciful, humble, giving person. What we see is what the Father's like. And when we say in the inner chamber, my Father, we're saying everything he embodied, everything Jesus embodied, is dwelling right within you, longing to reveal himself to you and how different he is. His holiness is his most attractive quality. Because you can't, I heard it said one time this way, the only way you can define holiness is by saying what it isn't. As you stand in the midst of it and you recognize things that need to leave. You can't say, well, this is what it's like. All you can say is, I know it's not like that. I know it's not like that. And when I stand in it, there's things that can't stand there with me. He's so different. And I believe that this morning, the Father wants to begin developing his ecosystem in each and every one of you. He's already been doing it, but he wants to continue to do it. Because an ecosystem happens here, it happens here, right? It happens corporately, it happens individually, happens in your family, in your home. And I think what we're going to do, because we've got communion set up, the Eucharist, as they call it historically, which means the great joy. I think it's all set up, right? Yeah, it is. Good. As we're going to create space. And we're going to do this, individually. So we're going to go into a time of kind of worshipful soaking. You guys can lead us in that. Why don't you just stand? And just as you're prepared in your heart, with the refrain, my Father, sitting in here, cognizant, whether, practically, I feel, sometimes you feel the sense of the weightiness of God upon you, but you're cognizant that something has fundamentally shifted in who you are. There's an ecosystem you want to thrive in, and that starts with our Father here. That as you partake in communion, the body and the blood, it's washing, it's nourishing, all that kind of stuff, but it's reintroducing you to the reality of our Father here. So as you're prepared in your heart to come take the elements, it's going to be entirely on you. But it's a moment between you and him. A restorative moment. Looking back. I remember what it was like when I walked with him daily, or I know what it's like now. And so thank you, Father, for that. But make it the reality of his presence in your life. Not a distant reality. Not a long to. Sometimes prayer is the longing for what was. You know that? God, I wish he was here with me today. That's prayer. That's your heart crying out. That's not you. That's, sometimes you go, I'm beating myself up. No, it's actually my heart recognizing the affection I have for him. So I couldn't say, I remember what it felt like. I wish I could feel that again. I can't say that without affection. So if that's where your heart's today, let the communion elements be your answer. I can't sense his presence, but I know he said he's here with me, so I'm taking this by faith that he's here with me. He's revealing himself to each and every one of you. It's who he is. So your Father, who sees in secret and is in secret, says, come. Come and say, my Father. So we'll just set the stage. You can come as you feel led to partake. As you've done that, where you can be released, you can hang out in here. We're just going to have the music going for a little while. If you're going to have conversations, go out to the foyer and there's coffee out there, all that kind of stuff. Let's just set some space aside for the reality of my Father. The reality of his presence. Amen.